Oh, yes. On the heels of the Dolphins losing Vic Fangio or mutually agreeing to part ways, and Vic Fangio making his way to Philadelphia, it's time to start looking for the replacement and who will be the Dolphins defensive coordinator. Welcome into this edition of Dolphins Today. Fired up to be with you. As always, I am your host, Jake Riepma. We got the breaking news yesterday, and today begins the search for the Miami Dolphins new defensive coordinator. So right away, I want to get the feel of the Dolphins Today community. Let me know down in the comments, do you like the idea? And do you like the fact that the Miami Dolphins have moved on from Vic Fangio? It's real simple. If you do and you're ready to move on with a new defensive coordinator, go ahead and type Y for yes. If you're a little upset about Vic Fangio leaving, go ahead and type N for no. And as I mentioned, we had this breaking news yesterday. Adam Schefter, several others reporting it. Here's the official tweet Adam Schefter sent out. But I want to focus on the second component of this tweet, in which Adam Schefter was talking about where Vic Fangio will end up, and that has in fact come into fruition. Adam Schefter reported earlier today as well that Vic Fangio is going to be the next defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. So one season in Miami, now on his way to Philadelphia. And let's look at that one season under Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins. It was a little bit of a roller coaster. The season started out pretty rough. Remember, go all the way back to week 1. That's when the Dolphins beat the Chargers 36-34. And the Dolphins were winning by way of the offense, right? They were winning shootout games. And then you look at when Jalen Ramsey came back into this Dolphins lineup on the defensive side, they really elevated their level of play. There was a lot of talk that, hey, Vic Fangio's system takes a little while to learn, and that players were eventually becoming a little bit more comfortable with their roles, with their assignments, and you started to see that come into fruition, which with very, very improved play defensively down the stretch. So Dolphins finished 10th in total defense, 20th in scoring defense, and again, go back to that AFC wildcard game against the Chiefs, and obviously, Miami wasn't really in it ever, but the red zone defense for the Dolphins was one of the few positives in that game. I think collectively, despite missing 8 starters on defense, Vic Fangio got the best out of that Dolphins defense down the stretch. They also finished with the 3rd most sacks and the 2nd best sack rate in the NFL regular season, and that's losing guys like Jalen Phillips, losing guys like Bradley Chubb, and eventually Andrew Van Ginkel, all of who contributed to the pressure rate for the Miami Dolphins. Now, what does the Miami Dolphins organization say internally? Here's the statement from Mike McDaniel. I want to thank Vic for his contributions in 2023. When we assessed the season, it became apparent that this was the best path forward for all parties involved. Now we turn our focus to 2024 and beyond with urgency as we identify the best candidate to lead our defense moving forward. We remain steadfastly committed to the development of our players and to building a winning team with sustained success. Now, let me translate. He was on this page. We were on this page. Old school versus new school. See you later, Vic Fangio. In with the old, out with the new. And exactly. Out with the old, in with the new. So, point being, the Miami Dolphins need to replace their defensive coordinator. And again, as we mentioned, Vic Fangio is heading to Philadelphia to be the Eagles' next defensive coordinator. So, what does that look like for the Miami Dolphins? I think ultimately the mutual departing of Vic Fangio with the Dolphins makes a lot of sense. You got Mike McDaniel, who's about as new school as they come. He's got the tags on his shoes still. He's shooting, with the players. And then Vic Fangio, very much an old school coach. It's my system. It's my mentality. You do things my way. He's an old school guy, very proven defensive coordinator in this league, but the continuity just wasn't there. That said, I do think Vic Fangio deserves some credit for getting the most out of the Dolphins defense in his one season. But I want to hear from you. Red pen time. Let me know down in the comments. Grade Vic Fangio's first season as the defensive coordinator, first and only season as the defensive coordinator in Miami. What do you give Vic Fangio? A, B, C, D, or F? Let me know down in the comments. Coming up, we'll talk some defensive coordinator candidates to replace Vic Fangio. But first, I want to give a huge shout out to today's presenting sponsor, Factor, America's #1 meal delivery service. And oh yeah, the month of January is well underway. It's almost, in fact, over. So hopefully your New Year's resolutions are going well. But I'll take it one step further. Don't focus on the resolution part. Think about making choices that lead to success. And specifically with your diet, that's where Factor comes in. It knocks a ton of the inconveniences out of the way. I'm talking grocery shopping. Forget about it. You know, the meal prepping. You don't need 50 different containers taking up space in your refrigerator with the meal prepping. No, Factor meals are delivered straight to your door. And oh yeah, there's tons of different options to choose from. And not just the meals as well. Don't forget about the over 55 weekly add-ons. I'll give you a little pro tip. The smoothies are delicious. They're great for grabbing on the go as well. My personal favorite on the meal side, though, the Chipotle pork chop. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it. Only takes 2 minutes to heat up, and then there's no mess as well. And I hate doing dishes. So don't take my word for it. Head to factormeals.com/FinzChat50 and use that code FinzChat50. That's where you're going to get 50% off. And I'm not even kidding you. Half off we're talking, folks. This isn't one of those 5% here, there. No, we're talking 50% off when you use FinzChat50 at factormeals.com/FinzChat50. And oh yeah, we love you and we care about you. So that link goes right in the comments of today's video as well as the description. Can't make it any easier for you. It's factormeals.com/FinzChat50 and use that code FinzChat50 for 50% off. Now, one part of this whole equation that we haven't really examined is the player's perspective. And I think there's a lot to be said in coaching. Yes, scheme is important, the X's and O's, but how about the ability to motivate your players and for your players wanting to run through a brick wall for you? How many times we talk about that? And maybe it is a little bit of coach speak and whatnot, but I want to see a coach that gets in there and gets the most out of his players, motivates his players, and they want to play for him. I think Hard Knocks offered a lot of the behind-the-scenes footage both on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. You see how Mike McDaniel gels with Tua. You see how he interacts with the stars on the offensive side, and you didn't really see that with Vic Fangio on the defensive side. Now, don't say, oh, Riepma just says that all a coach has to do is motivate his guys. No, X's and O's, scheme, very, very important. But I do think the camaraderie, the cohesiveness between the relationships and the dynamics of that relationship between coach and player is very important. Take a look at this from Javon Holland, who Javon had a breakout year. Say it what it is. It was the best year of his career, and some of that is a credit to Vic Fangio's system, but he posted a video when the news came out of him kicking rocks on Instagram. And I said this yesterday, I'll say it again, I don't love the subtweet, let's grow up a little bit, but I do think it is gives you perspective of how Jevon Holland felt about Vic Fangio in that he posted the video of him kicking rocks, essentially to say to Vic Fangio he can kick rocks. Now, how about his father? It's the NFL. It seems like high school football when parents are getting involved in coaching decisions, but that's neither here nor there. J. Robert Holland, the father of Jevon Holland, tweeted this out. He said, "Everybody loves the iPhone, but nobody wants the iPhone #1. It's time to #upgrade." So I think that's obviously directed at Vic Fangio, saying, yes, he's an old school guy. The original iPhone was great, but it's time to upgrade. Hopefully that's what happens with the Dolphins defense. But a little bit more reliable source, if you will, in my humble opinion, is the agent of several defensive players for the Miami Dolphins. That's Drew Rosenhaus, who had this to say, quote, "There were quite a few players that didn't necessarily get along with Fangio. It wasn't a great relationship with many of the players. It was not a unanimous positive relationship between now former Dolphins defensive coordinator Vic Fangio and the players." And this includes some of the star players like Jalen Ramsey. He expressed frustration with Vic Fangio's scheme throughout the 2023 season. And you go back to the second time the Dolphins played the Jets, the game at home, and Xavier Howard was out of that game, so Vic Fangio had Jalen Ramsey shadow Garrett Wilson, and he completely shut him down to the tune of just one catch. And that's the type of responsibility Jalen Ramsey wanted, because he's as good as it gets as a lockdown corner, and he just was not provided with the opportunity to put those skills on full display, in his mind, under Vic Fangio's scheme. So there's a lot to be said about player frustration in the dynamics of the relationship with the defensive coordinator as well. So All that said, let's not forget, though, Vic Fangio did produce some impressive results on the defensive side for the Miami Dolphins. Jalen Ramsey had a great year. Jevon Holland had one of his best years. And in my humble opinion, I think you look at the defensive line, Christian Wilkins had a career year. Andrew Van Ginkel before he got hurt. This is a great tweet from Fins Extra that illustrates exactly who else had career years under Vic Fangio. Let's not forget about the tear that Bradley Chubb was on under Vic Fangio. Jalen Phillips before he got hurt. Zach Zeeler, another guy. He signed that new deal leading into the season, and boy, did he produce from that defensive tackle position. I mentioned Javon Holland, David Long Jr., another consistent force on the defensive side. So say what you will about Vic Fangio, but he did produce results, and obviously he's about as respected as they come on the defensive side of the football in the National Football League. But time to move on, and so we look at the potential replacements. Here are my top defensive candidate replacements. There's a number of very, very qualified, credible potential replacements on this list, but we are going to highlight a few. For the Giants, Wink Martindale, he's a guy that recently left the New York Giants. He was the defensive coordinator there, and you got a number of ex-head coaches who are available, starting with Brandon Staley. You got Ron Rivera. Talk about old school. And I don't necessarily think Ron Rivera would be a great fit because in a lot of ways he has some similarities to Vic Fangio. And don't forget about Leslie Frazier as well. But I want to highlight a couple of them individually here. The linebackers coach internally for the Miami Dolphins, Anthony Campanile. He's a guy that I think could become the front runner for this position. But I also want to hear from you. Let me know down in the comments, who do you want the Dolphins to hire? If you were Chris Grier, if you were Mike McDaniel, you were the Dolphins front office, who are you hiring for this oh so important coaching decision? Because you got a lot of pieces on defense. You got a lot of guys that really started to elevate their level of play down the stretch. This is such an important hire. Let me know down in the comments. I'll tell you this. My top two, Brandon Staley, Anthony Campanile. Campanile, the internal hire. Staley just got let go by the Chargers earlier this season, but obviously had his time as a defensive coordinator with the Rams. Let's start with Campanile. And again, if you watch Hard Knocks, you know exactly who this guy is. He's the one that had the pregame or the pre-practice speech that got everybody fired up. He talked about the universal language of whoop ass. That's the kind of language he talks about in the NFL. He knows what it takes. Now, the experience part of this is kind of interesting because the Miami Dolphins were his first stop in the National Football League. Before that, he spent time as a linebackers coach at Michigan, Boston College, and Rutgers. Now, he did interview for the Dolphins defensive coordinator job last year before they hired Vic Fangio. So he was on the radar prior to Vic Fangio's arrival. Could he be on the radar for the potential hiring after Vic Fangio? Now, here's an interesting tweet from Cameron Wolfe talking about Anthony Campanile as a rising star coach in the league who already interviewed for the Giants defensive coordinator, so other teams have him on his radar. But take a look at the top of this tweet. You know who reposted this? Jevon Holland. And I'm not saying Javon Holland is breaking doors down, wanting Campanile to be hired. But I think it is interesting that Jevon Holland was so vocal about Vic Fangio leaving and is so in favor of Anthony Campanile being a potential replacement. Something to keep your eye on because players really seem to love Anthony Campanile. And again, I go back to Hard Knocks when he had everybody around. Christian Wilkins was going on that practice. Duke Riley and some other players that are important to this Dolphins defense seem to really be behind Anthony Campanile. Now, how about Brandon Staley? He's another one that boasts a very impressive resume that includes being the Chargers head coach from 2021 to 2023, but of course he was recently fired. His best time as the defensive coordinator came in 2020 with that Rams defense. And oh yeah, don't forget, on that same Rams defense was Jalen Ramsey. So there's a little bit of a relationship there. And one more caveat for you that just kind of is the stars aligning a little bit with Brandon Staley is that he shares the same agent as Mike McDaniel. So obviously there's some type of level of continuity, some type of communication going on with the fact that both Mike McDaniel and Brandon Staley share the same agent. So those are my top two. And if they're not your top two, I totally understand. But for today's exercise, I want you to know who gets the nod out of those top two. If you want it to be Anthony Campanile, type AC. If you're more in on Brandon Staley, go ahead and type BS. Either way, let me know down in the comments. because the Dolphins need to hire a defensive coordinator. They have the pieces on defense to be successful at every level. You talk about Jalen Ramsey as the top cornerback. They had the third most sacks in the NFL. You talk about that defensive line when healthy, Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, Christian Wilkins, Zach Sealer. That's a team you can win with on the defensive side. So picking a defensive coordinator will be so crucial for the Miami Dolphins. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this edition of Dolphins Today. And as always, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We continue to grow and grow as the Dolphins community. And even though it's the offseason, breaking news is going to happen like it did with the Dolphins and Vic Fangio parting ways. So we've got the aqua and orange covered from every single angle. And hey, how about a huge shout out for today's producer, Jake Chipper, keeping us on the air on Dolphins Today. Couldn't do the show without him. And as always, thanks for tuning in to Dolphins Today, and we'll see you next time on Dolphins Today.